Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We're going to be talking about the future of talent in finance and focusing on the long-term effect of the massive geopolitical change going on around us at the moment. Expecting this webinar to last about 30 to 45 minutes. We're going to send through a recording afterwards. If you've got any questions, please add them in the Q&A box and we'll try and answer them as we go. But if we can't, then we'll do so at the end. So Rob, who is my co-host today, has some internet issues, just as a quick heads up. And as this is the new world that we live in, so if he drops out, I'll do my best to cover his section.
Hi guys, though, here for now and intending to be for the long term, so we'll do our best.
Great. And the last thing to mention, just in terms of the logistics of everything, is that we're going to send a feedback form after the webinar. So please do take the time to fill it out if you can. It's really helpful for helping inform the content of this sort of series as we go forwards. So, as I mentioned, the other speaker today is Rob, who's the other founding director here at Instant Impact. For those of you that don't know us already, Instant Impact specializes in building and running high-performing internal recruitment functions. Rob and I set up the business 9 years ago to help companies address an area that at the time many were struggling with, which was graduate recruitment. Since then, we've evolved Instant Impact to become expert at everything required to make an internal team fire on all cylinders. So that's from the strategy to the people, the marketing and technology, really everything required to deliver a fantastic internal recruitment function. As part of that, we run a speaker series that we call Agents for Change. And we want that to be leading important industry conversations around the key subjects that surround and inform talent. So there's a couple of examples. When we could all meet in person, we ran 2 events, one where we had Adele Lomax, one of the heads of HR at Boston Consulting Group, who spoke at length around what they've done around mental health. And then we also ran one with Joan Moore, the head of early careers at Accenture, who was talking around establishing the roots of diversity with early careers programs. And since lockdown, we've really been focusing on webinars. For today's webinar, we're going to be focusing on the future of talent in finance. And we're drawing on over 130 different interviews that Rob and I have run with businesses since the start of lockdown. And also drawing on some of the projects that we're running with existing clients to help them plan for the ways that talent will change in the coming weeks, months, years, decade. As I mentioned, and as I know we're all feeling, we're currently all living through a time of unprecedented change to the way that we work and the way that we live. So I just want to take a stat from a different industry. In January, only 8% of GP appointments were held over video. It's now 81%. And whilst that's probably an extreme example, it's certainly true that most companies have undergone massive forced digital transformation and has seen more change in the last 3 months than in the last 3 years. We certainly have. And whilst a lot of us were expecting early days a speedy return to the workplace and to normality, many experts are much less optimistic. So they're predicting that it could take a year until, or more, until a vaccine or a cure is found. And even then, until then, we should expect to undergo varying levels of restriction as the disease peaks and troughs. But even when it is, when there is a cure or a vaccine, it may return every year like seasonal flu. But I think what is clear is that we shouldn't be expecting a return to what life was like before coronavirus anytime soon, or potentially ever. So today we're going to be looking into 5 shifts that Instant Impact expect to be here to stay, and what that means for companies and what that means for companies in finance. So we're looking at remote working, new skill shortages, improved industry reputation, record unemployment levels, and then also inequality and diversity. So a lot to get through. We're going to start with the most immediate change and maybe the most obvious one, which is remote working. So there's a study from the Office of National Statistics, which found that last year, only 5% of people reported to work from home on a regular basis. Compare that to how we're all working today, where the majority of companies have some or most of us have all of our workforce working remotely. Now in finance, with a greater regulatory burden than most industries, there's always been questions and concerns around how we can operate remotely. But everything that we hear, everything we read and discuss with leaders in the industries has been really positive, and that companies have been able to adopt to new technology and new changes really well. And now that businesses have proven that they can operate remotely, why should employees commute in every day on a packed train? Why should companies spend millions of pounds on expensive office space in central London, or indeed anywhere in the UK? A YouGov poll found that 45% of workers expect an increase in flexibility once lockdown is over, and that includes the right to, or the flexibility to work from home on certain days every week. So we're expecting that home working will be a continuing facet of our working lives in the future, and that some companies will start to rely on it much more heavily. And for companies that do embrace this change, there are some really exciting opportunities. Companies that master how to recruit, onboard, and train talent remotely will be able to tap into a much broader and more diverse talent pool. With teams or departments working remotely, businesses will be able to hire regardless of the geographical catchment area. So businesses in Edinburgh will be able to hire talent from London or Cardiff, or really anywhere in the UK, and vice versa. So that's going to make it easier to hire people who might struggle with a commute. So thinking about people with physical and mental disabilities, for example. It will also make working much more accessible for working parents. Now, I do know that it's been tough on those who've been working from home whilst homeschooling, but hopefully the homeschooling won't last for much longer. And at least we've proven finally that having a 3-year-old joining a conference call isn't the end of the world. And this all becomes much more exciting when you consider what it means on a larger scale. The businesses that do make a decision to build remote workforces will give themselves an amazing secret weapon. If it's as easy to hire someone in Cardiff as it is in Calcutta, then our talent pools can become truly global. I know that large companies have been offshoring their back offices and call centers for decades. So for example, Deloitte and JP Morgan both have large technology centers in India. But what's different about this crisis is that it's demonstrated that we can run complex business functions and have fully functioning remote businesses all the way from call center to board level. So what does that mean? What's the scale of the opportunity? Well, I used a simple LinkedIn search to illustrate it. There are just over 1,000 chief investment officers registered in the UK on LinkedIn. There are 8,000 in the US, and there are over 15,000 in the world. And that translates to a more junior level as well. So 4,000 credit analysts in the UK and 101,000 in the world. And it also translates into a technical world. So 7,000 cybersecurity professionals in the UK and 79,000 in the world. And all of this becomes even more interesting when you start looking at differentials in salaries. So think about this. The average starting salary for a sales exec in Cape Town is £7,500. Compare that to £21,700 in Coventry, and then compare that again to £50,000 in Colorado. I mean, it's really interesting if you start thinking about it. And at Instant Impact, we're looking at this as a huge opportunity, both for us and for our clients. And we're building in remote and global workforce planning into many of our strategies going forwards. If anyone is interested in exploring this further, we're offering workshops throughout June to help our community to better understand and better prepare for a remote workplace and a remote workforce. So anyone on today's webinar will be able to book in one for free if you're interested. And we've included the sign up link into the chat of the webinar now. Now, the second change we're expecting to see is an increase in competition for technical talent. Now, I know that's nothing new. It's been really fierce in the UK for years. In fact, ever since we set Instant Impact up 9 years ago, we've been fighting this technical skill gap. And it's certainly been around for longer than that. Competition that once focused on developers has evolved to include cybersecurity, data scientists, and machine learning experts. But what we're expecting to see is that the forced adoption of technology over the last 3 months will send that skills gap into overdrive. The need to enable more remote working will drive demand for cybersecurity experts so that finance firms can deal with sensitive information outside of the office. But we also expect companies to build, more companies to build internal tech teams, as we expect businesses to see the recent achievements of some of the challenger banks and fintechs like Funding Circle, who've really led the way with AI-powered loan approvals, for example. This competition is going to be compounded as contractors will be in short supply, as we predict a trend towards permanent employment. This was already happening with IR35, but we expect it to accelerate as the self-employed were probably the hardest hit during lockdown in our industry, and many were unable to take advantage of government measures, including furlough. So whilst many companies will be thinking of building their internal technology capability, it's going to be a lot harder to do, just in terms of the availability of people to join. So what are we going to do? So to combat this, companies should get really clear on what tech capability you want in-house and what can be outsourced. You could also consider building teams globally in countries without the same skills gaps. So a lot of companies set up in Eastern Europe, for example, where the tech skills and spoken English are both excellent. The other thing you can do is shore up existing contractors by making them permanent offers, or at the very least providing them with a bit more long-term job security, longer projects, etc. Of course, you can invest in hiring and training juniors. These guys and girls are often the quickest to pick up new skill sets, and as your lowest earners, they can be a fantastic return on investment. There can be a temptation when times are hard to be cautious, especially with what's going on at the moment, and not hire grads or trainees. But the risks there of creating an even bigger skills deficit in your business in a couple of years are really worth bearing in mind. Finally, you can retrain your existing staff. Now, unfortunately, as technological change speeds up, we're expecting to see a slew of jobs become obsolete. So I'd really spend some time identifying these roles and get out in front of it. You should be able to retrain your existing team with a few key future skills so that their roles don't become redundant. They've already got an understanding of the company and they've already got an understanding of the industry. So if you can do that right, they can remain remain adding value to your business for the long term. And the third change that we expect to see is an interesting one. We expect that reputations will be made and lost as a result of this crisis. So how companies act during lockdown and how they continue to act during the recession will be remembered. Mike Ashley is a fantastic example of what not to do, and also of how extreme the public response can be. So he lobbied the government to keep his shops open and his workers designated as key workers. And although he backed off pretty quickly and apologized, he only did it following a backlash in the press and in public opinion. And it certainly didn't leave Sports Direct covered in glory. Companies that are going to stick by their employees and do their best to protect their jobs, and companies that remain as transparent as possible will do wonders for their employer brand. So I think that's a real opportunity for our industry. Lenders and banks that have been on the forefront of the government economic recovery plans by administering CBILS and the loans there, and companies that have provided debt relief have the opportunity to restore a lot of the reputation that still suffers from the 2008 financial crash. And if things carry on as they are, then we expect to see an increased demand for candidates starting their careers in finance because they'll be following this improved reputation, but also seeking a more stable job in an industry that's weathered the storm better than most. So take the time to think about how you can talk about your business's response to COVID in a way that positively affects your employer brand. It can make a real difference. Over to you, Rob, if your internet's holding up.
It's holding up for the time being. Thanks, Felix. So yeah, do cut me off at any time if I'm going robotic or anything like that. And hi guys again. So yeah, last year the UK was enjoying record lows of unemployment, and unfortunately, by most predictions, this is likely to change quickly as we enter into the recession that we're experiencing at the moment. To put that into a bit of context, there are currently 8.9 million people on furlough. And as we near the end of the government's employment support schemes, we expect companies to start making redundancies at a rate not seen since the financial crash. A report released last week from the Learning and Work Institute found that the UK could be on track to exceed 4 million unemployed, a higher rate than at any point since the Great Depression. They also found that we could shortly be in a position where 1 in 3 working age adults are either unemployed, furloughed, or supported through the self-employment income support scheme. While this is obviously terrible for the country as a whole, it does present an opportunity for those companies that are able to take advantage of it. Medium-sized companies and challengers will be able to snap up game-changing talent. So if you have had your eye on any particular dream hires over the last couple of months or years, now is definitely the time to pick up the phone and restart conversations with them. With the financial crash, we're also likely to see a reduction in the number of entry-level hires in finance. Lloyds have cancelled their internship, HSBC have delayed start dates, Santander cancelled their internship, Goldman have delayed internships, PwC have cancelled internships, BDO have paused recruitment of new trainees and cancelled internships. The list goes on. More than a quarter of companies that were surveyed last month by the Institute of Student Employers said that they're anticipating hiring fewer graduates because of this pandemic. So there's likely to be lots of talent on the market. Again, this presents a fantastic opportunity for smaller and medium-sized companies to pick up talent that they wouldn't usually compete for. And this junior talent can be the bedrock of a digitally savvy workforce, as Felix has described already. Our next webinar is actually on this exact topic on 10 a.m. on the 29th of June, how coronavirus will affect graduate recruitment. So if you're interested, please do sign up. And again, a link will be sent through to you after the webinar. The final change that we wanted to explore and spend a good proportion of the time on today is going to be really seismic though, and that's the change of diversity and inequality. Minority groups and those at a disadvantage already have been worse affected by the COVID crisis. It's a shocking statistic, but Black people are 4 times more likely to die from coronavirus than white people. Combine that with the worldwide Black Lives Matter protests following the horrific footage of the police brutality that led to the death of George Floyd, and we expect to see a sustained campaign against structural and institutional inequality. Companies will be put under the microscope of public opinion, and it will no longer be acceptable not to have a robust policy to drive diversity. So we advise companies to act quickly on this front. As well as being the right thing to do, we expect that how businesses act now will have long-term brand implications in a similar way to we've just described with Sports Direct. Get it right and it could be a major boost to your brand and specifically your employer brand. Get it wrong and you risk being left behind and even alienating your existing staff. So there are 4 changes here that you can start making today that will put you on the right path. And again, we're running another webinar on this topic on the 2nd of July if you're interested in finding out more or going further. The first change is to make sure that everyone in HR and on the leadership team knows what they're talking about. It will shortly become commonplace, we predict, for staff to ask leaders of their businesses questions on their plans to improve diversity and inclusion. So we need to make sure that everyone in a leadership position or a position of influence within the business are ready to answer those questions knowledgeably and are ready to consider all different aspects of diversity. And that is a long list in terms of the different diversity aspects. It covers gender, race, sexual orientation, nationality, age, disability, neurodisability, educational background, socioeconomic background, religion, and so on. And I'm sure there'll be more things added to that list in the future as we progress. The second thing here is that employees are going to start asking more of their employers. A survey that we ran at Instant Impact back in February found that 80% of executives didn't have a diversity strategy. So if you don't have a diversity and inclusion policy or strategy, we'd advise making it an urgent priority for your business. Once you do have a strategy, it's key, absolutely key, to outline it to the business, to then be proactive and to monitor your success. The more transparent you are, the more likely you are to succeed and the greater benefit you'll receive when you do so. And if your current methods for attracting candidates aren't driving a diverse workforce, then we'd really advise changing. So in Impact, our methodology on diversity-centric recruitment covers 2 elements. attraction, which we'll go through now, and then selection, which is the next side. On the attraction side of things, we'd advise partnering with groups that support underrepresented talent pools, using a wide range of job boards to help reach more diverse applications and applicants, and make sure that people from any background can find your opportunities. Then check the job descriptions that you're using for gender coding to make sure that they appeal to all. From there, we also advise that you ensure that your direct candidate reach out, if you are doing it, is as diverse as the rest of your candidate attraction strategy. If you're reaching out to passive talent, make sure that the same diversity principles apply. And that is a fantastic way of finding great talent as well. Once you've made those first steps, you can then move on to concepts and elements like employer branding, and particularly tying that together with your D&I initiatives and highlighting the success stories that come from it. Too many companies in finance at the moment rely on their own networks and the networks of their employees to bring in talent. And whilst that's often the easiest, cheapest, and a fantastic way to hire great talent in general, it's also one of the worst culprits for creating companies without diversity of thought and diversity of background. We're absolutely not suggesting that businesses don't use their network. It'd be crazy not to, but it has to be part of a larger attraction strategy, and there are more things to consider now than ever before. And the final element here for today's component on diversity and inclusion is the selection element. You need to make sure that there is no bias or eliminate bias wherever possible from your assessment process. A couple of easy and immediate changes that you can look at here. Firstly, you can formalize your interview process and make sure that your hiring managers are assessing all of the same things so that it's consistent across the board. Ensure that you always have multiple interviewers to have a range of opinions in every interview, and make sure that all interviewers are trained in unconscious bias so that they're aware of the shortcomings that brings. If you're interested then in taking things further, an academic study by Schmidt and Hunter found that traditional assessment processes like CV screening and unstructured interviews are far less predictive of job performance than other components that you can have in your assessment process, like work sample tests, structured interviews, or cognitive ability tests. CV screening and unstructured interviews also leave space for institutional and personal bias, as much as we may think that they don't. If you want to have a really diversity-centric process, you should look at removing them from your process. Although we know that's a big change and one that you have to be ready for. So approach it with caution and with the right change management perspective internally. You can also consider then, if you are ready for doing that, removing formal qualifications or degree requirements from job descriptions, using diversity-focused assessment technologies such as testing or particular ATS applications. But each of these things have to be what's best for your business, and it's about finding the right balance between the diversity and inclusion elements, as well as making sure that the most important thing, you're hiring the talent that you need to succeed as a business. So we would suggest that it's a consultation process internally to find the right route forward there. Again, I've only just scratched the surface on diversity and inclusion. So if it is a topic you'd like to hear more about, we're running a webinar at 11 AM on the 2nd of July. Felix and I will be joined by the CEO of Applied. Applied are one of our technology partners that provide a technology to put diversity first in the assessment process in the way that I've very briefly touched on now. We'll also be joined by the founder of the Amos Bursary, an organisation dedicated to ensuring that talented young British men of African and Caribbean descent acquire the skills and mindset to move from potential to performance in higher education and the professions. And we'll also be joined by the head of talent at Ipsos Mori, one of our clients, who will share their ongoing experience in putting diversity at the forefront of their recruitment, as well as the changes that they're looking to make to go even further. We'll send around a sign-up link in the chat and also follow up on email. Equally, Felix and I would be very happy to have a session with you on what it means for your business and how we can help there if you'd like at any time. So in summary, and I'm pleased that we've done well on time. We're looking good for the half an hour slot. So in summary, we believe that you shouldn't underestimate the changes that are going on around us and their impact on the talent landscape, particularly in the finance industry. The crisis will change our world in a number of ways, including how we work, the talent that we hire, and the expectations that the public and even the government have on businesses. Before opening to the Q&A, I just want to leave you with one thought. companies that take risks and are successful at anticipating change will be the ones that lead this industry for years to come. Times may be uncertain, but that represents a rare opportunity to unseat the incumbent industry leaders. And we hope that you guys who joined us today take a few things away from this webinar that you're able to implement and bring into practice from there. So that's it from us. Just quickly turn over to the Q&A, see if we've got any questions in there. Haven't got any at the moment, but we'll leave it open for another 30 seconds or so, just in case anyone wants to ask us anything before we close.
Rob, you must have done a really good job at covering all of the covering all of the most.
I'll take that. But Felix, I'll put a question to you whilst we wait, which is, if you were to take one thing away from today's webinar to implement into a business of someone who's joined today, what one thing would it be? Given that we've talked about quite a lot of different things, it's going to be impossible to do them all at the same time. What would you do? My
biggest focus would definitely be on diversity and inclusion strategy. I predict that, I mean, first of all, as you said, not only is it the right thing to do, but I think that companies that don't address it risk some pretty negative for their potential hires in the future and the way that their existing employees feel. And I think that if you contrast that with what companies have to gain by getting out in front of it and being an industry leader, I think that it's a really compelling argument for getting involved and getting involved early. I see we do have another question here coming through on the chat. So Rob, Hazel has asked, are you seeing many companies shift to global recruitment yet?
Not yet, and well, thanks for the question as well, Hazel. Not yet. I think it's in HR thus far been predominantly a firefighting issue for most companies, and making sure that we're covering everything off to do with this crisis right away. I think in terms of global recruitment, we're starting to see green shoots of recovery in terms of more companies coming back to start hiring, and expecting that to happen over the coming months. That's when we're anticipating that more companies will look towards global recruitment. To share an example that's close to home though, my brother works for a digital marketing agency who have no central office. They're a UK company, about 50 people, and they employ people all over the world. Their policy is you can live wherever you would like as long as you've got a good internet connection, which I know is mildly ironic as I've been talking about how bad my internet connection is in London. So companies in different industries are definitely looking at this, and we would absolutely expect as we come out of the crisis that we do look at it more and more with clients.
And then I think the only thing to add there, Hazel, is that we certainly are seeing companies questioning whether they need to the office at all. So I think the step one in the thought process has been companies are coming to that pretty quickly, and that maybe we don't need an office. And then the next realization from there will be exploring that global workforce. Well, but I think no more questions on the. Oh wait, hang on, maybe we do. So Robin, another question on here is Wendy has asked, are you finding that universities are approaching us for support as students are leaving university in the next month or so?
Yeah, we've had conversations with a number of different universities that are obviously gearing towards making sure that their employers, that their students come out and are as employable as possible. I think again they've had quite a lot of firefighting to do on their end as well with how to deal with exams and other components. I think we'll see more and more of that over the next coming months. I think looking at how we can make sure that this graduating class can get into the employment market as quickly as possible is going to be a real focus for us and lots of other businesses over the coming months. So I don't think there's much that each university can particularly do individually if companies aren't hiring or are making decisions not to take on people. But if we are hiring, or if you are working at a business that is open to employing graduates, I think it is a great time to start building those relationships with universities. And whereas you may have previously been overlooked for a JP Morgan or a Deloitte who are hiring hundreds and thousands of people, now as a medium-sized employer or running a smaller graduate program, if that is the circumstance, I think you'll have more airtime and more of a collaboration from universities on helping you to pick up best talent from their university.
Absolutely. Well, I think it's probably time to draw a close to this. Thanks everyone for yeah, don't want to risk internet connections or building works outside my window any longer. So I hope that everyone has enjoyed it today. I hope you join us for a webinar, or fingers crossed an event in the future. Yeah, we look forward to hearing back from all of you later. We'll follow up with all of the resources and links, and also that feedback form as well. Have a.
And actually, just very quickly, Felix, you've got a next slide with some of a summary of all of the resources, just in case anyone wants to take them down. Some dates for your diary. We'll send them around in follow up, but if anyone wants to jot them down. Thanks so much for your time, and yeah, really enjoyed it today.